This is the Sunday stream opening song because the other song is copyrighted. La 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 la. Oh look, here comes Dog Cat Fox.
Hi, Sky.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Sunday stream. The stream I do on Sundays because Sunday is the day to stream on Sundays. Hope you're all doing well this beautiful Sunday morning. I guess it's beautiful depending on where you are. I also hope that you actually saw the intro, because the last several streams I've done, for some reason, the intro gets cut off, either in the broadcast or the final rendering. I'm not quite sure yet, so let me know in the chat if you saw the entire opening song. It's not me, why it's happening, as far as I can tell. So, there you go. Either way, hopefully I've stalled enough now that you can hear me. But before I get into what we're looking at today, who's joining me on this beautiful Sunday morning? It's always beautiful on Sunday. Noah Asensio, Mike Savage, Keeverdam, Pie Guy 07, Mike R. Who else is here? Some Namyo Nation, Tall Person, Pip Bin. Good morning to you, good morning to you. And for all of you who are either lurking or in the future, I hope you're having or have had a good Sunday morning. I was talking to somebody the other day. I don't remember if it was on a stream or otherwise, but I was talking about my YouTube channel, and I was saying, you know, one of the things that I try to do oftentimes in my broadcasts and in my content is to make sure I have a diverse set of voices on various subjects. So I'm not all dwelling on one person or one idea or one interpretation. But there are a select few of individuals who I have taken a liking to over the years, and from time to time check in on for the latest and greatest in whatever area of the world that they are experts in. And one of those individuals, one of those select few, is Dr. Chris Hoff, family therapist. And lo and behold, the other day, I saw that Dr. Hoff had posted a new podcast / glorified Skype call with another professional therapist, I assume. But it really was the title that got me. And that title was Centering Queer of Color Theorists in Therapy. I'll say that again for those of you in the cheap seats. Centering Queer of Color Theorists in Therapy. I have no idea what that means. But these are things happening in mental health. And I'm so grateful that Dr. Hoff is here to showcase these things for us when they arise, so that I can learn how people are having their minds assisted professionally. Yeah, so anyway, I have no idea what we're going to be talking about. I don't even understand the title. I can try to piece it out like some kind of spelling bee, but let's find out together. But before that, Dax Orion, Jay 2022, Simon Willikins, and Little Mo Zizlak. Good morning to you. All right, well anyway, that as preamble, and hopefully I've stalled long enough that the recording is actually picked up on YouTube for final rendering or otherwise. Let's get into it. This clocks in at 37 minutes. I don't know if we'll get to the whole thing, but I promise you we'll get to at least an hour and a half of real time before we get into the end of this. So, with that, a couple of seconds for sound test. You guys tell me if you can hear it, and then we'll proceed.
Welcome to the Radical Therapist, Mira.
Hi, Chris. Good afternoon.
You guys hear that all right? Dr. Chris Hoff, and I'm assuming, I could be proven wrong, Dr. Mira Debar. Guess we'll find out. Also, I'm sorry, apologies. Keeverdam, thank you so much. We'll be away from home again. Have a good stream. Thank you, Keeverdam, and thanks, Keeverdam, for posting the GoFundMes. You can find those at the top of the chat box for our friend Shady Grin, Angry Illinoisian, and his kitten. If you guys have a couple of spare dollars, their friends, and their loved ones could certainly use your help. And also, thank you, Redneck Ram. Good Sunday, Scribbles. Tell me something good today, because on my end of things are going to be unpleasant. Got to work in the rain today. Oh, I'm sorry. Tell you something good. Your family loves you, and kittens are cute. and dogs are loyal, and the sun will come out tomorrow. Unless it's overcast and raining again. But someday soon, the sun will make an appearance. I promise. On that, you can rely. Okay, that's that's all I've got. Thank you, Redneck Ram, so much. All right, so Dr. Debar and Dr. Hoff, tell us about queer color theorists in therapy.
It's great to have you here. Okay, so we're talking today basically about centering queer of color theorists in therapy.
It still makes as much sense saying it out loud as it does reading it. It really does.
And your work spotlights problematic discursive assumptions of queer and Black, Indigenous, people of color communities within mental health. And I'm wondering if you could say more about these assumptions, these discursive assumptions.
Okay, assumptions in mental health. So stereotypes, racism, etc. within mental health, I guess.
Chris, my background as a practitioner, long-standing practitioner, as a therapist, supervisor, educator, has really informed my research questions and my thinking in my dissertation, which is where I've come to really, really interrogate and examine these problematic assumptions. And what I know at the most basic level is that there's really not good information of what it means to be queer and BIPOC, first of all.
There's not good information on what it means to be queer and BIPOC. Okay, well, queer, depending on the context, means effectively homosexual. Okay. And BIPOC is quite literally Black, Indigenous, person of color. So basically anybody who isn't white. Unless I'm missing something.
You have to, a lot of it's really separated of either being racialized or being queer. It's really hard to find what the experiences, the impacts on mental health are when you sit in those communities together. That's the
maybe because all of those things, queer and all the terms making up BIPOC, are not determinative of someone's life experience or character or mental health or anything else. Maybe that's why they're all effectively adjectives.
First piece. I think the other piece is that is missing is that we, because I identify as a queer person of color, is...
Well, could you identify as something else tomorrow?
Our very identities are considered risk factors, right? So to be queer or to be BIPOC, what is being taught is the risk factors of substance use, suicidality, isolation, anxiety, depression, etc.
Yes, none of those things affect anyone who doesn't fall into those categories. Okay.
So we're taught the risk factors, but not the risk factors of homophobia, of transphobia, of racism and its presence. And so how do practitioners then know how to sit with clients and really help them work through really difficult, painful experiences that often are not connected or not seen as connected to gender expression, to sexuality, to being BIPOC. Often, and I hear this time and time again from my own clients, like it's just anxiety. It's anxiety by itself.
Okay, wait. So if I'm a therapist, let's just imagine a therapist of no particular definition, but just a therapist, and a client walks in who is of one of these demographics or a mixture thereof. Am I or am I not supposed to assume to know the quality of their life, their experiences, their mentality, and so on? I'm getting mixed messages here. Am I supposed to assume to know something about them just by their aesthetic or their orientation if I have some notion of that ahead of time?
This vacuum or this depression by itself in this vacuum, and it's not connected to how I'm being seen and received or not being seen.
What?
And so I think at the very basis, I think practitioners are not learning how to really sit with clients and look at this broader piece also of
maybe sit with the client and look at the client and not the abstracts that they fall into. You know, listen to the person and not the adjective. I mean, I don't know.
resiliency, strengths, community building,
What?
activism, resistance. I think that's really
What?
missing.
What?
The other thing that I see happening, it just happened again yesterday. Actually, it happened twice in the last month where students had the courage to come forward. One practicum student and one student in my class had the courage to come forward and say, I actually don't know what queer, I'm not comfortable to use the word queer. I don't feel like it's a word I should use. I don't really know what it means.
Not straight. There you go. That's about as generalized a definition as I understand it to be. Not straight. It's as simple as that. Does it really take a heavy lifting to your student? I'm assuming we're talking about quasi-adult students, as in like college students or people trying to become professional therapists of one kind or another. You know, grown adults who could, I don't know, do some research. And I'm not trying to sound, you know, overbearing or something, but seriously, it's not that difficult to find out these things. There are libraries, there's Google. You're really curious, you know, or there's just sort of being alive and growing up in this society. We live in a society. I'm not comfortable using that word. Okay, well, what word would you prefer to use? And I mean, the last time we did one of these with Dr. Hoff, I believe the last one, in fact, was something to the effect of queering your therapy practices. And it was amazing how even the speaker, the professional therapist promoting this idea, couldn't find a way to define exactly what that's supposed to mean in therapy. So I wonder if our speaker here will be able to do that.
And they felt very uncomfortable having to admit that.
Right.
And
so
what a great
yeah.
disappointment in your master's program that you're getting to the end and that this is the question that a student would be asking.
Gosh, the master's program. Okay, so we're talking what, like mid to late 20s maybe? I don't know, master's program or whatever. Okay, but in your master's program you have a student who is uncomfortable using the word queer. And what a great disappointment that we're. See, I wonder why that is. Is it because we've been I don't know, had it beaten into our heads over and over again over the last 10 years or so that there are certain words that are triggers, you know, that there are certain words that are slurs in and of themselves, even though they're used by other people to describe things in everyday life, and that certain people can't use certain words or else they are a villain? Maybe? I don't know. And who might be promoting that with stereotypes and assessing people on their aesthetics? And tell me again about what a therapist is supposed to do when someone who looks a particular way walks into their office.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking about that. I think because sometimes, I mean, you and I probably run in particular circles where we kind of take it for granted in some ways, right? Or like, but there is this knowledge gap, which is, you know, a mile long in some ways, right?
It's not a knowledge gap. It's a shaming crusade. That certain words aren't allowed to be used by certain people, or that certain words are inherently a slur or some kind of insult or something when used in a context that has nothing to do with insult. But, okay, yeah.
And I'm surprised. Why does it still surprise me? And
I don't know. You know what it also could be? It also could be the fact that terms and definitions are so malleable these days and fluid depending on who's saying them, right? Like, oh, what's a recession? So someone could legitimately walk into a room, think that they know what a particular term means, and then use that term, and then have everybody turn around and give them death glares because the meaning has changed for the day into something terrible. Could be that too.
And I have to really think about my own assumptions of how I'm teaching and the assumptions that I'm not backing up and saying, wait, let's back up with what actually queer means. And maybe because I identify as queer and they know my work is built around queer practice, they're more uncomfortable to ask me potentially. I'm not.
Yeah, why is that? Why do you think that might be? Because everything's a sacred cow now? Everybody's so oversensitive about everything and anything that might be asked of them or interrogated by, so where are you from? Is apparently the worst insult you can give someone these days. I just found that out on Twitter the other day. Not that I hadn't heard that before, but everything old is new again. It's like 2016 is right back around. It's almost as if my channel just started yesterday. If you look back to some of my first videos, you'd be hard-pressed to think that a lot of that stuff isn't just happening today, you know, and not 6 years ago.
Not really sure, but how did we get to this place where this word is used so commonly and yet people aren't comfortable or understanding what it
How
means?
did we get here? I don't know.
Which leads to my next question. In your work, you argue that queer people of color voices, viewpoints, perspectives are critically important to the mental health field in general. And I'm wondering, you're already talking about that, but can you say more about that?
Okay, here's the meat of it. All right, so why are the perspectives of people with specific attributes important in therapy? What distinguishes a white perspective from a non-white perspective, a straight perspective from a queer perspective? Why is it so regimented?
Yeah, what I hear, you know, I work in both, my education is in social work, but now I'm teaching in counseling. So I work with both disciplines in both fields. And what I hear again and again from almost all students is that they're really afraid of making a mistake. They're really scared. If I ask you about your identity, if I ask you if you think, is racism a factor here? Is the isolation based on heteronormativity something that you're experiencing? They're either afraid to ask, they're afraid to make a mistake. Sometimes they've said, am I imposing my own agenda?
Oh, I don't know. Are you? Are you whittling everybody down to the most lowest common denominator and then holding them to account for saying the wrong thing by any chance? Has that not been a feature of the social zeitgeist in the last 10 years or so? Why would anybody be afraid of saying the wrong thing? Why would anybody be afraid to offend someone? Because, I don't know, there's like immediate backlash. You could be canceled, you could be blacklisted, etc. Ostracized from your own social group if you say the wrong thing, ask the wrong question, have the wrong opinion. I don't know. Can you imagine why that might be these days?
And I continue to hear this. And so how I try to overcome that or bypass that is in my teaching, I always bring in speakers and colleagues, either into classes or in podcasts or little video conversations like this, who are queer or queer of color.
Do I have my own agenda? No, I don't have my own agenda. Why would you ask that? By the way, I'm going to bring people in first and foremost on what they look like and who they sleep with. Never mind their expertise, their actual experience or knowledge. No. I'm just going to segregate who is going to show up and who I'm going to position as important on the basis of everything except themselves. And only the attributes they possess or the demographics they fall into. Now, agenda? What agenda? No, I'm centering people on the basis of... No, I don't have an agenda. Don't question my decisions. If you ask, why am I bringing people who look this way or who sleep with these types of people first and foremost into the conversation, and on that basis alone, obviously you're either a racist or a phobe of some kind. All right, why would you ask me that question? Their voices are valuable because of what they are. Don't you know?
So that we can really just listen to their voices, hear their experiences, and really understand how they're conceptualizing their practice and the work that they're doing with clients. But what's happening is that we're not, I don't know what it's like for you in the work that you do, because your context is very different from mine. I'm located in Vancouver right now, Vancouver, Canada, where, you know, I don't have that same level of diversity in my classes with my students. And that might be different for you. In the textbooks, it's also completely absent. In textbooks, the case studies and the scenarios, the therapist is never named. Right. Often the client is not named. And so when the identity is not named, we default to this privileged position of someone who is white, straight, cis, middle class, unless it's named.
Okay, so you're not looking at these scenarios and these hypotheticals or these examples just as people. You need to know what they look like. You need to know who they're sleeping with. This tells you something about this person. Right? That is going to inform you of something. If the therapist is a particular way and the client is a particular way, outside of the information of the scenario, of the example in psychology or whatever, or therapy, what would that tell you? What would that do for you? I mean, if I gave you the exact same scenario and said the therapist is black and the client is white, and then took that exact same scenario and just flipped it, what interpretation would you have based on your knowledge of the race of the people involved? And I'll tell you something. If you can derive some kind of difference in interpretation of the exact same scenario simply on the switcheroo of races, you might be a racist. Oh, well.
And it's interesting to me that even racialized students say the same thing. They also don't assume the client's like them. Everybody's defaulting to this position of whiteness.
Oh.
And I think...
And so what happens if you default to a position of blackness? Or Asianness, or anything. I mean, what changes about your interpretation of a scenario of, you know, aesthetic ambiguity? What changes for you if you know or presume to know the makeup or characteristics of the people?
And I think that the harm that's causing is then students they don't know how to have these conversations with their clients. They don't know how to name their own positionality. They're not comfortable with it.
What?
They don't understand how that impacts the building of the therapeutic relationship. And so they're so excited when they work with me and I start really naming these things and helping them learn how to name the identity positions within their work. Because we're all learning the theory. We learn the theories really well. Intersectionality theory, anti-oppressive theory. We learn the theories, we don't learn what you do with it.
What do you do with it? I'm still waiting for something more specific. What do you do with it? How do you treat a white client versus a black client? How do you treat a heterosexual client versus a gay client? What are the differentials you immediately need to apply before you even get into what their problem is, before you even get into whatever it is they came to talk to you about, even if what they have to talk to you about has nothing to do with their sexuality or has nothing to do with their quote-unquote racialized identity? What does that inform you of ahead of time? What do you know about the person when they walk in the room before you've actually spoken to them about their problem? That's what I'd like to know. How do you modify yourself? How do you adjust how you're going to approach this person based on their appearance? That's what I'd love to find out.
And then they struggle with, well, so if I was never represented in the books, how do I know I'm doing therapy right?
Right.
My research participants told me that as well, that they really struggled when they were first practicing. I'm a queer person of color. I want to work with other queer folks or racialized folks. I know something's different and I don't know what it is.
I don't know what to say.
And I don't know if I'm doing this correctly then. So they're not learning to really listen to their own lived experience and let that inform their practice.
What does that mean? My lived experience inform my practice. Well, I don't know. What kind of therapy are they going into? Their lived experience. Like as what? As themselves, or as they decide to define and attach to their skin color or their sexuality? Like, okay.
That's great.
And is that different from your context? Would I be right in terms of where you're situated?
It's interesting because I've taught in different contexts, and in Southern California, for example, in the school I'm teaching at now, I'm doing an adjunct. I'm teaching a family counseling class this fall for Cal State San Bernardino, which is largely, first gen students, right? And so, but then when I've taught in Orange County, where I actually live, it's predominantly white, right?
Okay. All right. Now, a scenario I could see actually being applicable here is, let's say you're a therapist who specializes in gay relationships. Okay? Something like that. It might be decidedly helpful if the therapist themselves is gay. Maybe. I don't know. I mean, that's very specific. That's sort of an experiential thing that might actually be relevant to such an interaction. But even then, relationships are relationships. Is it then impossible for a heterosexual person to counsel a gay couple? No. Or vice versa? No. So, what are you talking about? What does it matter that some people over here are predominantly white and some people over here first generation? First generation. Last I checked, first generation college students, all that meant was they were the first person in their family to go to college. Or does first generation in college now mean something else? Is first generation now specifically a term for non-white? You see how maybe changing definitions and throwing things around that don't make any sense can confuse someone? I can kind of empathize with her student who was like, I don't know if I'm supposed to use queer anymore, or what. Anybody in the chat, does first generation college student specifically now mean a non-white college student? Because I was under the impression, and maybe I'm wrong, it was just like the first person in your family to go to college is all that meant.
And so it's just interesting how, and the different experiences in each context. Yeah. So.
And what does it mean when we're trying to teach relationally? So often what I say to my students is, think of who's not here, and by virtue of that, whose voices are not missing, and how that's shifting how you learn from each other's experiences.
Whose voices are not missing?
So I really make them aware of the gaps. And then what they say to me is that they do have an awareness of their gaps, and they really appreciate that I'm acknowledging it and really working to address it.
I'm a really awesome teacher, guys. All my students really appreciate everything that I do. Could you give an acted example? I know it is so difficult, seemingly, after doing so many of these things, to conjure up a success story or an example from your own experience that is apropos to the conversation. I know it is impossible to do, but could somebody, someday, some way, provide one to give context to all this gibberish?
That's great.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. That's great.
Okay. So let's try. There's been a critique that theorists of color and queer theory is work that has been treated as an add-on, with white Eurocentric theorists still being centered. And I guess, how do you view this critique, and what should therapists do with it? And I've been reading Olufemi Taiwo's work on the light capture, and I'm really struck by the idea of building new rooms or world making rather than asking folks to leave the room, that kind of thing. And I'm wondering what you think about all that.
Okay, they're talking shop here, and I can understand that when you're speaking with someone who presumably knows some inside baseballs compared to you. I don't know that I understood it, but maybe they'll explain. Probably not.
I love the term world making, first of all, because it means
making worlds.
Again, how I understand world making based on some of the cultural theorists that I have been reading is when I think of world making, I think of not just what we see with our colonial influenced eyesight. How can we really see from a world making lens who's here, who's always been here?
I don't know. Could you use your non-colonial eyes to suss everybody up on the basis of skin color, maybe? Maybe? I don't know. How do you do that?
Whose voices are still here?
Yeah.
And how do we listen to it?
Yeah.
Which is very different from who's physically just here and then listening to them. So how do we bring those voices in?
Those voices. Those voices. They've always been here. Only within the generation in which they live. What are you talking about?
And which is again why I really attempt to center those queer and queer of color theorists and voices. And to me, queer world making, I like to call it queer world making for the purposes of my work right now. But I want to teach that distinction between LGBT as these binary fixed identity positions. So once you're the L, you're always the L. And it never changes, and so that becomes a fixed position, which a lot of people find very restraining.
What?
And then it's.
Do you have any idea what you're talking about right now? I mean, I know I'm asking rhetorically, but what? Once you're that L, you're always that L. I mean, if you're a woman who's attracted to other women and you don't have any other preference, then yeah, what?
It's taught as a competency, so LGBT competencies versus the idea of queer as an identity that's fluid, that's relational, that's situated, that's contextual.
What?
Or the idea as when we think of queer as a worldview, as a way of being, as a way of seeing the world, as a way of moving through the world. To me, that's what world making is. It's like, how do we take all of this and how do we continue to move forward?
With all the gesticulating and circular whatever, I feel like I'm more watching a quasi-religious meeting testimonial than mental health discussion. Okay.
Right. You're gonna escape the binary, even in
escape the binary
social projects, right?
We will join Xenu.
Yeah.
That binary is always sneaking up on us, isn't it?
The binary. I just imagine the binary is like this monster, like the nothing from Neverending Story. The binary is sneaking up on us. And it's like this two-torsoed beast of a man and a woman, and they're so explicitly male and female, and they're crawling towards you like the thing. It's coming up on us, the binary.
It continues even with me. And so again, getting back to this idea that students know the gaps, but they don't know what to do with those gaps, or my practitioners or people that I supervise, they know there's gaps. And I believe for practitioners, but even for clients, the people that we're working with in mental health, there's an understanding that I want to say more, I just don't know how to say it.
Or you're presuming that your client is going to say something you want to hear and you have to draw it out of them? Maybe? You know that mental health does not mean you are a mind reader, right?
I know I've been impacted by my experiences and I'd like to talk about it, but I need someone to help me bring it from the back of my mind to the forefront and being able to verbalize and share that,
that's just what therapy and counseling is. I mean, psychiatry, what is it? Trying to understand the origins of someone's behavior going back to their childhood and what happened and this, that. I'm really trying to understand what's going on here. I'm trying very hard, if you can believe it.
Difficult, it's painful.
Yeah.
It needs to be honored. It needs to be acknowledged, really treated with a lot of care.
Yeah.
And also understanding that there's also not always good language for those experiences. That's what I think of as world making. Again, it's the seeing, the hearing, the listening in a way that's very different.
You know what I think of, and I know this is simplifying things, but then it's just the way it is. You ever see that episode of The Simpsons where Marge is afraid of flying? Okay. And the whole episode just goes through this rigmarole of her trying to get over her fear of flying, and she goes to a psychiatrist, and eventually they find the root of why she has this trauma about getting on a plane, and it has nothing to do with being afraid of crashing or anything else so much as there's something else going on that is reminding her of a traumatic event. Yeah, that's what I think of when I think of like what psychiatry, psychology, therapy, that kind of stuff. Trying to get to the root of somebody's problem, confronting it, trying to cope with it, and get past it, if it's something that can be get past, or at least, moderated within yourself so it doesn't become a full-on obstacle in just enjoying life. That kind of thing. That's what I think of. That's what she just described here, as though it were some kind of revelation or something specific to a very, narrow demographic of people. Unless I'm missing something, which is entirely possible because I have almost no idea what's being said at this stage of the game.
From the colonial way of conceptualizing.
Oh,
that.
Jesus.
Is that how you think about world making?
I think about world making as a piece of graph paper, a pencil, a ruler, and a D&D book most of the time. And I don't play that much D&D.
Yeah.
You're reading something different.
Yeah, no, I like the idea of like, the fluidity that you're describing and escaping the binary in these fixed positions.
Escape the binary.
And then, I'm really interested in like Anna Louise Keating's work around post-oppositional practice, she was very much, very informed by Gloria Anzaldua's work.
Right.
And is actually publishing a theory handbook on Gloria Anzaldua's book. It should come out. It's actually out. I pre-ordered it. But
okay, good. Yeah.
So these ideas. So I'm interested in these post-oppositional ideas. I think even in sometimes that's why the Alike Capture book kind of captured me, right? That some of these even best intentions have been hijacked in particular ways, and then pit us against each other again and again and again.
Like what?
And so, yeah, I'm kind of interested in how do we escape that oppositionality. And
I want to extend the benefit of the doubt that all of this, again, is just professional inside baseball. I don't have to give a whole lot of exposition on this because we're professionals. We've each been trained in this very specific discipline. And so these terms, these references are just reflexively known. I could understand that, because if I start talking to somebody about the intricacies of Vampire the Masquerade, an outsider is going to go, the heck are you talking about? So I could get that. At the same time, it also just feels like he's just saying things. Disconnected things that don't have any meaning. That just sound psycho-professional. I can't get away from that. Because if these guys, especially our speaker, she says she's a teacher, she's an educator. And yet she hasn't given us any specificity in anything that she's said so far. It's all been just terms and references. No examples. Like, I had a client one time that was X. And so, accordingly, I modified my approach to this person in this way. That would be a relevant and useful example for what she's presumably talking about. But we can't even get that, apparently.
Yeah, and so
I like that. That's important. The best intentions, how they've been hijacked.
Yeah.
How?
But you're talking about colonization and decolonization, and
Yes.
that leads me to my next question, actually. And I'm wondering if you could say a bit about your view of decolonization. It's a word that's used quite a bit these days in many contexts.
Yeah, it is. Please tell us, what do you mean by it?
And how do you view the work of decolonization in therapy? Counseling?
Yes.
I think, again, like a lot of identity models or frameworks, and I'll talk in a little bit about intersectionality.
Oh, I can't wait for you to talk about intersectionality. I love intersectionality. Oh boy, intersectionality, the art of taking several molehills and piling them together into a volcano. It's great.
And anti-oppressive work, but decolonization very similarly has become something that we're supposed to know and we're supposed to do. But what does that really mean?
I don't know. Tell me.
As a practitioner, as an academic, I want to keep learning how to center the voices that are missing often, or that we learn, and the difference between learning and taking, and learning and honoring, and really thinking about how to then really interrogate our practice.
Yeah, because you have to avoid cultural appropriation, because you don't want to take from somewhere else. You want to learn and then rebroadcast, not branding it as your own, but instead honoring these diverse voices from several different places. I'm also gesticulating while I'm saying all this just for effect. You can't see it, but I am, in trying to simulate whatever the heck we're listening to.
I question myself often as a settler in Canada on Turtle Island.
You're a settler? You like plant a flag and found a homestead and like have cattle or something?
And what am I doing to ensure that I'm really showing up in a way that really honors those perspectives, not just because of how indigeneity has been so erased, but how to continually just interrogate our own practice and the colonial constructs of our work.
This is amazing. This is really amazing. The art of saying nothing with so many words. It is, I mean, I really have to wonder, within their own minds, from their own ears and eyes, do they understand what they themselves are saying? Have they convinced themselves that they're speaking words of relevance and coherence? Or are they just like so used to getting away with belting out vocabulary words and buzz phrases willy-nilly as that's a passable way to move through the world professionally? Which is it? Do they know that they're saying nonsense, or do they believe that they're saying something intelligent? Which is it, I wonder? I'm not a mind reader. I don't know, but I'm constantly curious. This goes for this video and, you know, all the consultants I watch on DEI stuff, and just, it's amazing.
And, you know, I was recently invited to contribute a book chapter to a book, and when I found out that there was not anyone who was Indigenous that was represented, I turned it down, because to me that didn't feel right.
I'm a racial supremacist, you see. If there's not people in there that look the way I want them to look, I'm not going to have anything to do with it. Now, imagine, if you will, if our speaker was the liliest of white and said the same thing about some publication that had no white people in it. What would you say about that person? What would you say about that person's standards and worldview? Just a thought experiment.
I'm really driven by Two-Spirit scholar Coley Driscoll.
Two-Spirit scholar.
Something that really, really touched me so much. He asked 3 questions. How can anything be decolonized while still in colonized land without actively addressing land redress, self-determination, and reconciliation with First Nations people? That's what we call them in Canada. How can a practice be decolonized without recognition and discussion of the influence of colonial ideologies, of scientific claims, of universalism, objectivity and neutrality that is still present in counseling? How can we say we're decolonizing our practice if we're not confronting those very ideologies, which I see all the time, for example, in code of ethics and self-disclosure and boundaries, And how do we decolonize while colonization is continuing?
I don't know. How do we? How do we do any of these things? Do you have an idea? Is it an impossibility? Because the way you're saying it sounds like there's no way around it. So if it's an impossibility, then maybe find something else to do with your time. I don't. What does a colonized worldview do in the therapy session? How does a colonized therapist behave towards subject X versus a decolonized therapist deal with subject X? Could you give us an example that we might compare and contrast these different theories, philosophies, or practices? You know, for those of us that are listening who are not indoctrinated into whatever gobbledygook, psychobabble, pseudo-intellectual religion you guys are espousing right now?
So I really am, I feel what is the word, the responsibility of those questions.
To
constantly think about my practice.
Yeah, okay.
And what I'm doing and how I'm speaking with others.
What are you doing? How are you speaking to others? Anything?
That's how I think. When I think about decolonization, I think it's something that we need to constantly be learning.
That's right. Yeah.
Learning.
Okay, your work is also interested, and you've spoken to this a little bit, but your work is also interested in the liminality of identities, and I'm wondering if you can say more about that.
I will give Dr. Hoff. I always have. I give Dr. Hoff credit for, at least in the interviews that I've looked at so far. I've done 3 or 4. I think this might be the third or the fourth, where he's interviewed somebody. And as much as Dr. Hoff is a subject all unto himself, when he's doing his interviews, he's asking his guests direct questions oftentimes. Please explain this thing. Define this term. Tell us how you do X, Y, Z. He asks these questions. And I appreciate that because at least he's trying to get answers from his guests. He doesn't press them very often when they return with a word wall of nonsense, but at least he's trying. So in that sense, I appreciate Dr. Hoff for giving these speakers the opportunity to answer these questions as they will. Given an open format with no constrictions, this is their answer. And so if this is their honest and complete answer to sometimes very direct questions, then I'm happy to hear it, because it really does tell me, as authentically as possible, what they think about what it is they're being asked about. And if they comport themselves to be experts in these subjects, this is their expert opinion and their expert content. So there's that.
You know, the beautiful place about my practice right now is how some things have just sort of fallen into place. I don't know if I would say random is the right word, but I was reading, I kept on seeing references. You mentioned Gloria Anzaldúa's work, Borderlands, particularly that book, and I kept on seeing reference to it, and it's not available electronically. So I want to read this work. I keep reading it, keep seeing it referenced. Last summer, I was at a friend's house in Toronto, and he had it on his shelf, and I started reading it. Of course, I couldn't put it down. It's like had never thought of this idea of liminality, this idea of liminal identities, this third space, this gray space, and it was so meaningful in terms of the tension of trying to live as a queer person and as a person of color.
Okay. Could you define a liminal identity first? Like, I don't know what that means. I am less than a layman in this instance. What is that supposed to mean? And reading someone else's book suddenly gave you a revelation about being abstract things. Okay.
And so instead of trying to reconcile those tensions, what about the idea of a liminal space and seeing it as this beautiful space from which to move the world? And I was so excited when I read her book, and also the way she's written it with the prose, the Spanish and the English, like how you feel the liminality while you're reading the book, right?
You feel the liminal. Okay. Liminal. What does liminal mean? Relating to a transitional or initial stage of a process. Occupying a position at or on both sides of a boundary or threshold. That's it. Feeling the liminality. You're feeling the transition. You're feeling the initiation of what? Liminal space. What?
That's why it's such a beautiful piece of work. And so
is this a book report now? He asked you about... Okay.
You know, like Julie Tilson's book, who you interviewed in January, very much like Julie Tilson's work, Borderlands was a huge game changer for me in terms of how I'm understanding identities and the tension and what we often term as, you know, we call it compartmentalization. I keep it separate. I'm either this or I'm either this. Right. And now here's this idea of saying you don't have to do it that way.
No, you could just identify as you by your name. And not by your component elements that say nothing about who you are. You could do that, you know. You could embrace you as a person and not you as a mixture of adjectives. Imagine that liminal space for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you can think of it, conceptualize a different space. And I think it's not the work of mental health is the space, the conceptualizing the space that we're in when we're well, when we're not well, when we're doing better, when we're down. I think the work in mental health is about that space.
What?
And so this felt like a really beautiful parallel to something that I already understood about this space that can't always be named. And
what is that where Voldemort lives?
Here she was naming it in this beautiful way.
What?
Yeah, and I think it, even as a white cis straight guy,
just as the worst possible creature and wretched being on the planet.
The work affected me in a lot of the same way, and that idea of liminality, right? And and how, especially in training folks, and how I think our field's culture wants to put us in a box too. Everybody kind of boxes, in certain ways. And so how can we escape that? And
how can you escape putting people into boxes? Have you listened to your own guest in talking about how she'll bring people on to her podcasts and her live streams because of the boxes that they fall into or the check boxes that they fulfill? How do we stop putting ourselves in boxes? I don't know. Consider yourselves individual people. Consider others individual people, and not some adjunct to a monolith demographic. Maybe?
And some of those, the liminal idea. I think it's so much of the work. I think I've gotten to the point I'm saying, that. What is therapy other than, walking together through liminal space with the folks, right? And that's kind of where I'm at with it right now. And
liminality, I'm going to have to, I'm going to make it a point sometime in the near future, if I can find one, a TEDx that tells me, or at least offers to tell me, the definition of liminality when it comes to psychology or whatever else. What does that actually mean in distinct terms? Because I want to know now. I've heard this all over the place in the last couple of years. It seems like the fashionable thing to say. Liminal space, liminality, blah, blah, blah. I still don't know what it's supposed to mean in a practical sense. So I'm going to attempt to remember, in near future, to find a TEDx, or perhaps for a Sunday stream, something that gives us some more concrete information on what that's supposed to mean. If there is a concrete answer, and it's not just some amorphous buzz phrase that the author of these books came up with to try to be their own, like, white fragility marketing ploy.
And Gloria Ann Zaldú is like a great guide for that kind of work, right?
Absolutely.
That
just
work,
beautiful.
yeah.
Just beautiful.
Yeah.
It was so exciting, but I just loved that I happened upon the book. And then he said, please take it with you. So I read it on the plane all the way back to Vancouver, and I couldn't put it down. I couldn't put it down. I was so excited.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
All right.
Wow.
So we talked about that. What about, you write about, this is interesting, you write about expansive intersectionality, and I'm wondering if you could say more about that.
Right.
Expansive intersectionality. Okay, that's a new one to me. You think we'll get a definition?
So again, intersectionality is something that we learn theoretically. Intersectionality at its most basic definition is the way different identities come together and how we sit with those identities. But again, what do you then do with that?
Well, actually, the definition or the origin of intersectionality was how... okay, I'm going to try to do this without looking it up first, because I am going to look it up to double check myself. As far as I understand, intersectionality was brought up initially by, what's her name? It's on the tip of my tongue. It was about black women and the effects that being a black woman in society has a knock-on effect in how the world interacts with you. Oh, what was her name? I did a TEDx with her on it. I'm gonna kick myself when I can't remember her name. Reality theory. Kimberly Crenshaw. That's what it was. Okay, I tried. It was coined in 1989 by Professor Kimberly Crenshaw to describe how race, class, gender, and other individual characteristics intersect with society. But specifically about black women at the time. So, yeah, even I reflexively knew that her definition was not a complete one. Anyway.
So I've learned this theory.
Yes.
I learned it in school. We've
Yes.
talked about power. We've talked about privilege. We've
Yes.
also talked about multiple social locations. And then what?
And then what?
So the idea of expansive intersectionality, in all my research, I finally found one resource.
Don't say some book or something. Just give us the definition. I mean, intersectionality could mean anything and everything that you can list about yourself. It might have started as like 4 elements, race, gender, class, etc., whatever. But now it means everything. Orientation, what kind of foods you like, the country you come from, the language you speak, yada, 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 yada. I mean, intersectionality also already includes everything. What does expansive intersectionality mean? Just give us the definition.
By two queer practitioners who were sharing the idea of expansive intersectionality. They were talking about working with couples. And then they demonstrated in the article how, when I'm working with this couple, this is what the couple's talking about. And this is how I may over-identify with one over the other. How might that show up in counseling? Like, it's very practical. It really walks the practitioner through. This is what we want you to do.
You want to set aside your personal biases when interacting with your clients as much as possible? Wow, what a concept. Trying to be as objective as possible. It's impossible to be completely objective, but to, make a conscious effort. Wow, what an amazing idea for a therapist to consider. I would have never guessed. What?
It's not just who they are, it's who you are with them in this intersectional space.
Oh, so having a conversation, having a discussion is expansive intersectionality. Who I am and who they are in this space. What?
And so I was really excited by that
Sure.
idea, and then it can use that to teach actually how to practice intersectionality. So that's one way of thinking about expansive intersectionality.
That's one way. No. There is a definition. Either there is a definition or there isn't. Is what you described expansive intersectionality, where there's more than one person in the room interacting with one another? Is that what that means, or isn't it?
And then the second piece was self of therapist. Mm-hmm. And in this particular article, which I found in the Addison and Coulthart article, D.Watt Jones talked about how she again practically walked through how you do this, how you name who you are in the relationship with the client. So she says very practical things like wait till a third session. Don't start it in the beginning. Wait till a third session.
Wait till a third session to do what?
Sometimes it's easier to have certain kinds of conversations than others. Sometimes it's harder to talk with clients about the fact that they make two to three times more money than you do as a practitioner.
It's difficult for me to talk to you about your income because you're so much wealthier than I am. What? What does that have to do with... What?
So there's a big class difference between the two of you. How do you broach that conversation?
Why do you have to? If it's not relevant to their therapy, what does it matter? Do they pay their bill? Do they have the insurance? What else do you care about when it comes to class? What?
Versus talking about the client whose income is far lower than yours. So she gives very practical tips about how you...
How do I talk to this poor person? How do I approach this wealthy person? Like, hey, there's a common denominator there. The one common denominator you should probably be focusing on, that they're people. Wait, I don't know. I would love to know. How do you meter your therapy on the basis of the wealth of the client? Do you have an answer for that? Or the author you're talking about, or the theorist you're talking about? How do they moderate how they approach someone on the basis of what they may or may not know of that person's class position?
Talk about this, how you talk about the neighborhoods that people live in, marginalized neighborhoods, privileged neighborhoods.
What? Give us an example. For crying out loud, you're all foreplay and no payoff. What does it look like to do these things? What does it look like to have a conversation with client X in economic class A and then client Y in economic class B? What does that supposed to look like? What is the difference? How should I approach that? What should I keep in mind? What should I say to one that I shouldn't say to the other, and vice versa? Anything? Any practical knowledge here?
And it's who is that again? Because I know people are going to ask me.
D.Watt Jones.
D.Watt Jones.
Okay, D.Watt Jones, yeah, okay.
Who I found from reading Addison and Coulthart's work around intersectionality, and then D.Watt Jones was referenced in it. And so...
It's all very sort of intersectional in that way.
How do you do it?
How do you do it? Yes, tell me, how do you do it?
These practitioners are telling us how to actually do it, and I think that's, again, what doesn't happen enough in a lot of programs and in practice. I mean, so often in clinical supervision, in case conferences, the entire focus is on the client. The client is this, the client is this, the client did this, the client's problem is this. I don't know how to solve this. And
yeah, okay, talking about the scenario, the individual, the actual, why they're there to see a therapist, okay?
Everything is on the client.
Everything is on the client, yeah.
And if we step back and try to be really, truly relationally intersectional, the questions that we should be asking are very, very different. And
such as...
These are some of the questions that I really push when I see students doing this. I do this a lot. Mm-hmm. So now I just have them follow this template that they have to use before they present a client. And so some of the questions that they have to really think about and answer in their, before we get to the transcript is, how do I describe the relationship with this client?
How do I describe the relationship with this client? I mean, I would hope it's therapist to client, and nothing any more than that you maintain a professional demeanor distance and accord with them. Could you give us an example of some answers that you get to that question? Because I'm not quite sure, not being a therapist.
What do I bring to this session?
What do I bring to this session? Well, hopefully years of experience, education, and knowledge.
How did I build this relationship?
By listening and helping this person over time.
Where did I get stuck and why?
Trying to decipher someone's mind by their skin color, maybe.
Is there anything I wish I had addressed? Anything?
I don't know. I mean, if you couldn't see their feet, could you decipher the paint on their nails?
Anything I could do differently?
I don't know.
What relationships are represented here that represent other relationships in the client's lives?
Shouldn't the therapist be a separate entity from the client's life? Shouldn't there be, like I said, some kind of professional distance between the patient and the therapist? The therapist is sort of the uninvolved third party. That's sort of like a blank slate for the client to sort of bounce off their ideas or their thoughts and everything off of. As much as is possible, obviously. I mean, there's no perfection here, but if your client starts seeing you in the same way as someone in their own personal life, that might be something to discuss. If they start seeing you as a mother figure or father figure or some kind of, I don't know. I'm not a psychologist. What do I know? Thank you, Redneck Ram, again. I take offense, Scribe. Well, you can give it back. I'll have you know that as a poor man, I'm not actually a people. I'm actually a swarm of deadly killer hornets wearing a skin suit. Make me mad and see how bad I swarm you. Yeah, swarm of deadly killer hornets wearing a skin suit. Kind of reminds me of that movie Mimic. You ever seen Mimic? From back in the 90s? Maybe not. Yeah. F. Murray Abraham was in it. And, what's her name? Mira Sorvino. Yeah. Or Candyman. Candyman was kind of like a swarm of killer bees. That's where my mind went. Sorry, was I disrespecting your complaint by trailing off into other thoughts? I apologize, Redneck Ram. I was going on a mental journey. I was indulging in the liminal intersectionality of the thoughts you gave me. I appreciate that. Thank you, Redneck Ram.
But I have them because they're so, just like in counseling, where narrative therapy teaches us not to be problem-saturated, problem-focused. Mm-hmm. This is my way of really pushing them not to be client-focused. You can't.
Don't be client-focused. Focus on yourselves. When the client walks in, the most important person in the room is how you feel. You as the therapist. Think about yourself. Don't focus so much on the client. The client is just an afterthought at best. No. Your liminal experience in this intersectional, expansive space is what's important. I could be interviewed on this show and sound just about as legitimate.
You can't just talk about the client.
Because
you're in that room with the client.
Yeah, that's right.
That's great.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
And you brought up narrative therapy, and that was my next question, because I know you're drawn to narrative therapy. I'm wondering if you could share a little bit of what attracted you to narrative therapy.
What is narrative therapy? You know what? Before I'm going to ask them to give me an answer that I'm not going to get. Narrative therapy. What is narrative therapy? Okay, narrative therapy, or narrative practice, is a form of psychotherapy that seeks to help patients identify their values and the skills associated with them. It provides the patient with knowledge of their ability to live these values so they can effectively confront current and future problems. Okay, and then there's an infographic kind of thing. Let's see. What are the key principles of narrative therapy? Interpretation of experiences is done through language. Yes. Individuals can have different realities of the same experience. Yes. Look at any kind of court case with multiple witnesses to the same event. Narrative can help us make sense of our experiences. Yeah. Interactions with others impacts how we experience reality. Narrative therapy is a style of therapy that helps people become and embrace being an expert in their own lives. In narrative therapy, there is an emphasis on the stories that you develop and carry with you through your life. So, basically, why are you afraid of flying? Well, I had a traumatic experience with my father on a plane when I was a young child. So Marge tells the story of what caused her to have a fear of flying. And then she understands where that fear comes from. She can confront it and overcome it. That's narrative therapy, huh? Wow, what a revelation.
Yeah, and again, like Borderlands, it was one of these accidental, beautiful, maybe not that accidental, beautiful
South. All right, so you ask your client to tell them a story relative to their problem. Okay, I am not a trained therapist. I do not have a degree in psychology or psychiatry or anything else. Is this a new idea? Is this some revelation of psychotherapy? Having the client tell a story from their life that may be connected to whatever their issue is? Becoming an expert in your own life?
Things that happened. I was looking, after being a social worker for decades, I was asked to do some supervision in a nonprofit, in a queer nonprofit with a counseling program. And so I'm supervising therapists and quickly realizing, I need to really learn a little bit more about being a supervisor. And then maybe being a therapist. Okay, I need to learn a modality. I've joined a practice. I'm still not comfortable. What's my modality? What am I drawing on? And I'm looking around for something to take. And here's this 3-day intensive training. It's affordable. The timing is right. The location is right.
I mean, she's taking part in narrative therapy right now. She's telling us this long-winded story. Maybe it's attached to narrative therapy, but I mean, she's kind of, okay, all right.
And it happened to be narrative therapy.
No!
I had no idea what it was. I had no idea, Chris.
You had no idea? I just looked it up! I didn't know what it was either. I looked it up. I read it. It sounds like boilerplate psychotherapy to me with just a fancy name attached to it. But okay, this was some good gravy.
And so it started on Friday with, what is this? Why is everyone so excited? Like, they were just so excited to be there. What is going on? By Sunday, I was hooked.
I was hooked, asking people to tell me about their lives. Tell me a story about your father. Tell me a story about the time that you did XYZ. Oh my gosh, it was amazing. Oh, it opened my eyes. Oh, it was so amazing. Everybody's so excited. What is it? Narrative therapy. Right. And then, 5 or 10 years from now, it'll be called something like story psychology or something. They'll just give it a new name, a new twist on it, make it seem like it's brand new. Nobody's ever thought of this before. Sell a couple of books.
I was hooked. It's the anti-pathology stance, the anti-problem focus stance, the meaning making, the learnings. One of my particularly favorite ways of practicing narrative therapy with clients is helping the client learn from themselves.
Can you imagine working with a client to learn more about how they themselves work and understand themselves towards a better future? Oh my God! Are you kidding me? Is this a joke? Is this a joke? I've gone to therapy. I've gone to counseling. Why did I go to therapy and counseling? I've told this story before, but I'll try to keep it brief. I'm doing a narrative therapy session, guys, so just bear with me. So for many, many, many years of my adult life, I was stuck in the depths of anxiety from about 21 through, I think, about 36. I had severe anxiety issues, and I spent all that time not seeking help. Because, it was a pride thing. It was an ego thing. It was also a thing where my rational mind understood that these reactions I was having to minor inconsistencies and inconveniences in the world were not logical. It was this battle within myself where I couldn't help but react to sending out an email with a misspelling and freaking out about it, while the other half of me was like, you are out of your mind. That's the problem with anxiety disorder. You don't have a choice. You feel this stuff even when you know it's irrational. And that was the battle I was fighting for the better part of nearly 20 years. All right, until one day, I realized after talking to a friend of mine that this is no way to live. And that I was spending more time fighting myself and being miserable than I was actually enjoying anything. And so I bit the bullet, so to speak, and I went to a therapist. Well, first I went to a psychiatrist, and I got a antidepressant, my first real antidepressant in my entire life. And here's what happened. I took that antidepressant, and within the first 2 weeks, no lying, it felt like a light switch had been flipped and the volume was turned down on my anxiety. Just walking out in the world, all that static, all that stress, all that tension just kind of faded. And I was scared. And here's why I was scared. I thought one of two things. Either my brain has been completely rewired and I don't know what the effects are going to be, or this is all psychosomatic and it's all in my head, and I don't trust that this one antidepressant was a magic bullet. And so not knowing the answer to that question, not knowing how I operate in the world without my anxiety as either a healthy or unhealthy function of it, I went to a therapist. And I explained to this therapist, I have not known a me for the last some odd 20 years without anxiety. And so for the better part of my adult growing up, there's a version of me that has this problem. And now, seemingly, that problem is gone. So I don't know how the me with anxiety functions without anxiety. Because I spent my entire adult life locking myself down emotionally when things happened that I felt like I was overreacting to. So where does all of that instinct, reflex, and machinery internally go when there's no more battle to fight? That was my question. And so I would talk to the therapist and I would tell them, I encountered this problem today and this is how I dealt with it. I have this relationship and this is what happened before I started taking the medication and this is how I'm handling it now. Because I was looking for someone to work with me to find out from an objective viewpoint, am I behaving in a reasonable way? Because my perspective is completely skewed. I was looking to have this therapist help me help myself. And this lady is talking about this like it's something that just fell from the sky yesterday. Am I the one who's nuts here? Am I the one who's nuts?
Trusting the client's own wisdom and knowledge, and that they've gone through crisis before. What can we learn from that crisis that could help now? Who supported you before? Why are you isolated now? Why are you not telling anybody? It's just such a, the stance is what I love. It's not a do step 1 to step 5. It's what's your stance.
Yeah, right.
And from there, developing your own particular style of narrative therapy. That's, I think, what really is so meaningful for me, because then I've gotten to practice it in a way that's meaningful for who I am and how I want to show up with my clients.
Okay. We've only got a few minutes left on this. I think we might actually finish this thing. Well, or at least get enough through it. Do you guys want to finish this out? Or is there's about 10 minutes left of the actual talk. I've got about 10 minutes left of my usual time frame. Well, I'll keep going. You guys let me know in the chat.
That's great.
That's great. That's actually, you know what? Actually, before I do that, let me go to the chat. I'm sorry. I get so distracted with the subject I'm looking at. I do glance over at the chat, but I really should showcase you guys more often. Shiro Amada, it was useless and would take away too long to even get started, so I addressed my own issues and worked at fixing those underlying issues to address the larger mental problem. Therapy overrated. Yeah, I didn't stay at therapy long. It was a few months, because I was just trying to double check with someone else that while I was having this obvious change in my life, from going from constant daily anxiety to basically it turned off, and as soon as I kind of figured out, okay, well, at least according to this professional, nothing I'm saying sounds entirely off board, so I guess I'm done for now, and if I need anything else, I'll come back later. I didn't see it as a lifelong necessity for me. I used it for as long as I needed it, and then I stopped. She wasn't, I didn't find it overrated, but I was using it for a very specific utility. I just need a double check from someone who doesn't know me, and I can describe to them, the before and the afters. That's all. So, yeah, therapy works differently for different people, amazingly enough. Gatorama Compe, what's the difference between therapy approaches as the focus? For example, in psychoanalysis, the focus is on the interpretation and symbolism and meaning of what the client says. Sure, okay, right, but engaging with the client and having them relay to the therapist or the psychoanalyst or whoever else what they have to say on a particular subject, be it an experience, a dream, or whatever, that's having the client help themselves by helping them interpret what's going on, right? That's not new. Like narrative practice or narrative therapy, it just sounds like boilerplate rebranding of something, doesn't it? Maybe I'm off. I don't know. Lexi Mads, that's what it's like with chronic illness when you start to get better because your identity in life starts shifting and you don't know who you are again. Well, yeah, sure. If you've spent every day of the last 20 years fighting cancer, and then your cancer goes into remission or is cured or something, and then it's like, okay, my entire purpose in life has been doing this. Now what do I do? Where does the warrior go when all the enemies are dead? Right? That kind of thing. That's how I kind of felt. It's like once my grand enemy, my demon, was gone, and all I've been doing for the last 2 decades is fighting this demon. Like, well, if I don't have a fight left in me, who do I fight? Am I going to be a fighter? Am I going to look for somebody to combat? That kind of thing, It's around that same time that I started my YouTube channel, but I'm sure there's no connection, correlation, or causation. Yvonne Solomon, wait, didn't she say she was a social worker for 20 years and she's only now learning these basics? Those poor clients. I don't know if she said 20 years. She said many years or something. Maybe. I don't know. But yeah, these concepts I've just picked up through osmosis from television and books. And that's, again, I'm not calling myself an expert, but, the basic building blocks of a relationship between a therapist and a client, everything being said here sound like she just found out about it yesterday or something. I don't know. And Gatorama again. I think in narrative therapy, they don't literally ask the client to tell you a story, but you build a story on which the client functions every day. Okay. But is that any different than throwing hypotheticals at your client and having them give you an answer? Or I don't know. I'm not going to claim to be an expert, obviously, but it's just like some of these things just sound way too familiar to come across from our speaker as surprises, if that makes any sense.
Okay, you also write about the invisibility that queer racialized students experience in training programs, and I'm wondering if you can say more about that.
Yeah, and I think that's again where that impact of erasure and invisibility is that when students are not being seen in their textbooks, they're not seen in who their faculty is or who their instructor is. Studies are still telling us, when I started teaching over 10 years ago. Even now, studies are still showing that the difference it makes to have a queer educator or a queer professor, and how queerness is more centered in the teaching as compared to when that's not there. So there's still this big gap. There's a really big gap, I think, in working with queerness, and particularly queer color identities. Students are just not getting to really learn that they do have lived experience that they can bring, and that they can use in the gaps that they're seeing in the work, that maybe it means that they have something that they can bring. And so how do we highlight their voices, their knowledge? I call it cultural knowledge. How can we really think about what their cultural knowledge is, what they know?
Or cultural competency, or cultural proficiency? Or, here's a question, if the problem is there's not enough educators who are queer, how would you solve for that problem? Well, what would that job interview look like? I just wondering. It's a question I've asked any uncounted number of times before when I've heard this theory. Like, oh, well, the students need to be able to see themselves in their educator, right? Or their educator needs to possess certain attributes that have nothing to do with merit or experience or education or knowledge, but just, something on the aesthetic level. How do you solve for that problem? Or how would you solve for that problem?
And how to help them see that can be meaningful in their work.
How?
And to me, that's also about working relationally.
What?
Right? And I think to work with our own community.
Your own community, as though any particular attribute you may name consists of a monolith. Just
to work with our own community is what I know, and what my study participants had told me is that there's this joy, like when we get to show up as our full selves with our clients.
Boy, show up as your full self with your client. Oh, golly, because you are really the important thing in that room. Aren't you supposed to be a blank slate? Aren't you supposed to value objectivity as much as possible? To be a sounding board? To take in what the client is giving you and try to assess it practically, or at least as pragmatically as possible? Oh, but no, you, Matt, what I think and my experiences and da-da-da. Yeah, it's unavoidable to apply your knowledge and experiences to what they're saying, but what are you trying to achieve as a therapist? How do you envision yourself as a therapist for another person? Maybe I'm just too pie in the sky. I don't know. Or Pie Guy 07, one of the two.
And we don't have to pretend to be something we're not. When they already know we're queer, there's no issue of disclosure. So
But what does it matter? Are you planning on having a sexual relationship with your client? And if so, you should probably quit. But what does that matter? Okay, unless you are billing yourself first and foremost as a therapist for queer people, right? Or I am a family therapist for gay couples or something like that, or same-sex marriages or whatever. Maybe that matters, okay? But in general terms, just talking about therapists in the broad strokes, what does it matter who you like to sleep with?
So-called self-disclosure. We get to be ourselves. There's this joy we feel. We're showing up fully. And
showing up fully. Am I just too idealistic to think that a professional therapist sees the client as the most important person in the room for any particular session? Am I just nuts for thinking that? I mean, again, on an idealistic level. Right, on a practical level, everybody's different. No two therapists are alike, so on and so forth. But it's one of those sort of like ideals, right? Like journalism. You try to be as objective as possible and remove as much bias as possible. There's an ideal you're attempting to achieve. You'll never get there because there's no such thing as perfection, but that's what you're reaching for. Is that kind of objectivity, that kind of professionalism, that kind of, unbiased look and focus on the client and their issue and everything, is that so beyond the possibility of considering as valuable these days? Or is it like, it's me, it's all about me, I'm the therapist, I have to center myself, I have to be authentic, and the client needs to know about my authentic self? I don't know.
The client gets to show up fully.
Oh, yeah.
And
Are they, though? Are they not guarded in some way? Isn't it up to you to sort of like make them comfortable and allow them to, let go of whatever's bothering them? Is telling the client who you like to sleep with your avenue towards making them comfortable to open up to you about their problems? I mean, I guess it would depend on the situation, but is that just like the go-to idea on your first date? Oh, sorry, first session?
it's also messy. It's also complicated.
Oh.
Working within small communities.
Messy and complicated are two different things in that context? Okay.
You have to, and this is what Julie Telsom teaches around queering practice and queer relational ethics, takes a different intentionality to allow us to work in the way that we want to with our small community, but also then doesn't mean that we have to hide, that we don't go to social events. We can't go to sport. We can't join a sports team because our clients will be there. I was at a Afro queer event for Vancouver Pride last weekend, and 3 colleagues were there, and the 3 of them said a lot of our clients were here, so they only spoke to each other.
What's wrong with professional distance? Not engaging with your clients in social settings to maintain that distance. What's wrong with... Is that wrong?
How do we not do that?
How do you not do that? How do you do anything else as a professional? I must be taking crazy pills. And honestly, I think I might be done with this. I know there's only like 5 or 10 minutes left in this thing, but I don't know that I have anything left to try to absorb here. You guys tell me. Lexi Mads, I plan on leaving my legs and brain in the car and not fully showing up. That brings about an image. Faithless, completely lacking in professional detachment. Yeah. I mean, honestly. Yeah, Surgeon General's warning. I am not a professional psychologist, therapist, psychotherapist, psychoanalyst, nothing. I don't have any education in that. I am a layman. I've gone through counseling before. I've heard things from people in my life. I've seen things on television, documentaries, so on and so forth. Am I off base in some drastic way? Am I just like living on another plane of existence where a lot of the things our speaker here has been saying just are in la la land? Or are talking about things that, again, seem to me to be just the basic building blocks of a relationship between a therapist or a counselor and their client? And she's talking about them as though they're these new inventions or something. I mean, I understand that this is one of the soft sciences and consequently is always moving and being reassessed and reformed and so on. There's no, 1 + 1 = 2 with everything, but some things just sound a bit too common to be this exciting. I don't know. Or maybe if she was like a young grad student or something and just found out about this thing, but that's not what she's putting herself off as. Jim Healis, this woman confuses being a therapist with being a friend. That's a very, very succinct way of putting it. And that's what you're supposed to avoid. You're supposed... Okay. As far as I understand it, and in my ideal view of the profession, you are supposed to avoid creating a social relationship with this person. You are there to be a sounding board, a blank slate, an analyst of a kind, and have a separation. That you don't have the confusion of being friends. You don't have the confusion of, positioning yourself as a figure of anything other than help. And here, how many times have we either seen, heard, or otherwise where that relationship gets confused between the client and the therapist, and then the therapist has to recommend they start seeing a different therapist, right? Because it's unhealthy for them to have a connection beyond the professional with their mental health guide, therapist, counselor. Let's see. Anything else from people before I start wrapping things up? Simon Wilkins, bring your authentic self to work. Yeah, it's all about our authentic selves, because most times we're all lying. Yeah, confusing like a professionalism with deception. Now, if you're a lawyer, that kind of goes hand in hand, but you know what I mean. Like coming to work and doing your work and leaving your personal life at the door for the 8 odd hours that you're doing your work, and then turning it back on when you leave the room, because it's irrelevant to doing your job. It takes less precedence in getting your job done and earning your living. But somehow that's an illegitimate self or something? I don't know. Anyway, I'm going to call it here, guys. I think I've had enough psychobabble for one morning, and I'm pretty sure you may have too. Let's see. Programming note, next Sunday. Okay, next Sunday, there will be no Sunday stream. There will, however, be the first episode of a new series that I'm hoping will take off at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, next Sunday, the 28th, August 28th, the first episode of Living on Borrowed Crime, a interview panel talk show where I bring on true crime content creators and we discuss the genre, the cases they're interested in, videos they're working on or potential cases in the future and so on, and just hang out and sort of nerd out on that subject matter. Okay? The first episode will feature In Human Form, All Fuzzed Out, and Stay Awake. Now, if you go to my YouTube page, there is a link to that upcoming video at the top of the page. Please go there, look at that, set a reminder, share it if you will, if you know people who like true crime. And links to all those creators' information is in the description of that oncoming video. So take a look at their channels if you like true crime. I'm hoping to bring on other true crime content creators as the episodes go. I'm looking at this maybe as a once a month kind of deal, that time of the month. And so, yeah, check out that first episode next weekend, next Sunday, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Hope to see you there. But the next time you'll see me, more likely than not, is Thursday. This coming Thursday, for two things, probably. One, a review of She-Hulk Episode 2, because I can't keep myself away. And two, at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern next Thursday, another episode of TED Excellence, where I may try to find something on liminality, just for educational purposes. But we'll see, no guarantees. But with that, everybody, thank you guys so much for joining me on this beautiful Sunday morning. Moderators, thank you for keeping an eye on things, even though everyone here is so well behaved, and we've had very few bot attacks lately that you have very little to do. Everybody who donated either to myself or to the GoFundMes pinned to the top of the chat box, thank you guys so much for your generosity. Really do appreciate it. Everyone, have a good rest of your Sunday. Have a good rest of your weekend. I hope the week ahead is calm and fruitful and beneficial. I hope you're all safe and well. If you are not well, don't go to any of these therapists, and please get well soon. Take care. Bye-bye.